If you've looked to see what I've got for this week, you may have noticed that there are two lectures this week, one for Chapter 5 and one for Chapter 6. This one for Chapter 6, of course. My problem was that I didn't look at the schedule very well, and I missed Chapter 6. So now I'm doing it separately from Chapter 5. And then there was a problem with Chapter 5. I had a copyright violation, and it wouldn't play my video, so I had to get rid of the copyrighted material. And that took all day. So now let's go ahead and get started on chapter 6. Yes, I do make mistakes. The need to justify our actions, the costs and benefits of dissonance reduction. On March 26, 1997, 39 members of the Heaven's Gate cult in Rancho Santa Fe, California, were found dead, participants in a mass suicide. The cult members died willingly and peacefully and didn't really consider it suicide. They believed a spaceship behind the Hale-Bopp comet was their ticket to a new life in paradise. They bought an expensive telescope, but when members of the Heaven's Gate cult could not find a spaceship behind the comet, they returned their telescope for a refund. Obviously, there was a problem with it. The telescope, not their ideas. Their attitude was clear, and given their premise, their logic was impeccable. We know an alien spaceship is following behind the Hale-Bopp comet, and if an expensive telescope failed to reveal that spaceship, then there must be something wrong with the telescope. Obviously. Generally speaking, the members of the Heaven's Gate cult were not stupid, irrational, or crazy. Neighbors considered them pleasant, smart, reasonable people. Their behavior was an extreme example of a normal human tendency, the need to justify our actions. And there's the Hale-Bopp comet. I remember 1997 watching that thing streak across the sky. And you say streak across the sky, you couldn't see it move. Every night it was someplace, but you couldn't really see it move. But that's what it looked like. And that's where they were. That's the suicide. Hauling off the bodies. We humans strive to maintain a relatively favorable view of ourselves, particularly when we encounter evidence that contradicts our typically rosy self-image. Yes, we would rather have comforting lies than unpleasant truths. Most of us want to believe that we are reasonable, decent folks who make wise decisions, do not behave immorally, and have integrity. We want to believe that we do not do stupid, cruel, or absurd things. If we are confronted with information implying that we may have behaved in ways that are irrational, immoral, or stupid, we experience a good deal of discomfort. This is known as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is discomfort that people feel when two cognitions, beliefs, and attitudes conflict, or when they behave in ways that are inconsistent with their conception of who they are. Leon Festinger in 1957 was the first psychologist to deal with the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance, and he discovered that it always produces discomfort, and in response, we try to reduce it. There are three basic ways that we try to reduce cognitive dissonance: by changing our behavior to bring it in line with the dissonant cognition, by attempting to justify our behavior through changing one of the dissonant cognitions, by attempting to justify our behavior by adding new cognitions. If someone is a smoker and they know that smoking harms one's health, they might relieve their dissonance by changing their behavior, quitting smoking. You can rid yourself of the dissonance by changing your cognitions. Smoking is enjoyable, it relaxes and relieves nervous tension. Smoking actually improves your health. The smoker can attempt to justify their behavior by adding new cognitions. Look at my grandfather. He's 87 years old and he's been smoking a pack a day since he was 12. That proves it's not always bad for you. Self-affirmations are distortions aimed at protecting one's self-image as a sensible, competent person. Self-affirmations help people feel good about themselves in spite of the fact that they engage in this destructive behavior. They might try to bolster their self-concept in a different domain. Yes, it is not very smart of me to be smoking, but I'm really a very good mathematician. Therefore, I can smoke. The process of reducing pain is largely unconscious. We are in a constant balancing act of trying to stay happy. We rationalize bad news to try to reduce our disappointment. I hate history anyway, so if I get an F, that's okay. The teacher hates me. All teachers hate all their students. That's a given. Everybody knows that. Impact bias is a tendency to overestimate the intensity and duration of our emotional reactions to future negative events. When we think about the future, we overestimate how bad negative events, like the end of a romantic relationship, will make us feel. What we fail to recognize is that dissonance reduction often helps us bounce back quickly. And some ice cream, it looks like, and tissues. Given that people have successfully reduced dissonance in the past, why is it that they are not aware that they will do so in the future? It is not very effective to hear ourselves say, I'll try to make myself feel better by convincing myself that the person who just rejected me is an idiot. It is more effective if we unconsciously transform our view of the interviewer. We feel better believing that objectively he is an idiot. Because the dissonance reduction process is mostly unconscious, we do not anticipate that it will save us from future angst. While Festinger found that any conflicting cognitions could cause dissonance, Aronson in 1969 discovered that the most painful dissonant cognitions are those about the self. When our self-concept or self-esteem is threatened by the cognition that violates our view of ourselves. In any decision between two cars, two colleges, two potential lovers, the chosen alternative is seldom entirely positive, and the rejected alternative is seldom entirely negative. So while making the decision, you have doubts. After the decision, your cognition that you are a smart person is dissonant with aspects that didn't fit your choice. And this is one for me. This was a cognitive dissonance of mine. I rationalized drinking the Mountain Dew Code Red. Really loved the taste of it. Really good stuff. I rationalized drinking Code Red because I was exercising a lot. Well, I was still getting a Mountain Dew Code Red belly. It was expanding every day. And so I decided, eventually I figured out, my goodness gracious, you're being stupid about this. Why not just start drinking diet pop instead of drinking, that sugar-filled stuff, 170 calories. Oh, it's got 340 calories. Oh my goodness gracious. 340 calories per can. And I was drinking, in the summertime, I was drinking a lot. So what I did, I went to the diet stuff. The only time I drink the hard stuff, the stuff with sugar in it, is when I lift weights. And I do it almost as a reward for lifting weights, because lifting weights is hard. And I get tired and I need the sugar. This may be me rationalizing again, but I need the sugar to keep from falling asleep as soon as I get home. I discovered that one time. I was taking care of my grandson. This is in Florida, and he was at daycare, so I lifted weights and I came home. I picked him up and I came home and we were playing, I don't know, the trains or something. And of course, he was only about 18 months old, but I just about dropped. I could barely keep my eyes open. And I figured, well, that's not a good idea. So the next time I uh, lifted weights, I got a 20-ounce bottle of Code Red, and I was okay. I was okay the rest of the night. So that's my rationale. Yeah, tell me how wrong I am if you like. When given a choice between two equal alternatives, the healthy mind will reduce the post-decision dissonance by displaying the negatives of the chosen alternative, downplaying the positives of the rejected alternative, and this was proven by Brehm in 1956. Which shirt should she wear? She needs to decide. More dissonance is created when the decision is important. There's also more dissonance created when a decision is permanent. The more permanence in the decision, the more dissonance created. I have a former student, and he's he's trying to decide whether to take a job. He needs to come back. He's living in Bangladesh right now. He's in Bangladesh, and he wants to come back to the States. And he has two job offers potentially. Well, he's got one job offer and one potential job offer. But the second job offer, the one he hasn't had yet, is a better job in a nicer place than the first job. And he's trying to decide what to do. But he needed to make his decision yesterday. Because yesterday was Friday, and he told the first place he would make his decision by Friday. And I don't know what he did. He tried to call me yesterday, but we kept missing each other. Anyway, cognitive dissonance. He wants the better job, but if he doesn't get offered that job, then he lost his chance to come back. He may potentially have lost his chance to come back to the United States. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what he did. We'll see if he took my advice. My advice was to take the first job and not worry about the second job. And I told him once he makes his decision not to ruminate about it, not to think about it, because if you do, you're always thinking that you made the wrong decision. And in this case, both decisions are good decisions, are potentially good decisions. Okay, well, anyway. Oh, it's hard to tell. He's kind of a worrier. The next worst thing to hellfire is a bad marriage. Marrying the wrong person is like living with the devil himself. Or herself. Salespeople use high-pressure techniques to make sales. In a technique known as lowballing, they will get you to agree to a low price for a standard vehicle. After you agree, then you start adding to the cost by adding needed accessories. Though the cost is more than you wanted to pay, you agree because you were already thinking of driving after the sale. You're already committed to the sale. Lowballing works because sense of commitment triggers the anticipation of an exciting event, price only slightly higher than other prices elsewhere. We face moral dilemmas on a relatively frequent basis. These dilemmas challenge our sense of self-esteem. Our decisions in these instances are likely to entail dissonance, reduction, which will make us more or less ethical in the future. When a person decides to resolve a moral dilemma by being unethical, they can reduce their dissonance in two ways. According to dissonance theory, it is likely that you would try to justify the action by finding a way to minimize the negative aspects of the action you choose. You could adopt a more lenient attitude toward cheating and convincing yourself that it is a victimless crime that does not hurt anybody, that everybody does it, and so it's not really that bad. An individual who chooses to be ethical will suffer cognitive dissonance as well. They may justify losing what they would have gained by their unethical behavior by convincing themselves that the unethical behavior is worse than their loss. After rejecting the unethical behavior, they will be more adamant about remaining ethical. Once upon a time, I was looking for a job in Mississippi, and I was looking for teaching jobs. And the first person that offered me a job was East Mississippi Community College. And they were paying, I can't remember, it was like $600 a semester hour. I was making peanuts. And then I was offered a job. It was like 2 days later, I was offered a job at Mississippi University for women, and they paid $1,000. But since I had already committed to the first job, I couldn't do the second job. But later on, I did get to teach at Mississippi University for women. It was really kind of interesting. If I wasn't ethical, I probably would have told East Mississippi, "I'm sorry, yeah, I told you I could teach this class, but I can't. I'm taking a job at Mississippi University for women," and they probably would have understood. But ethically, I just couldn't do that. So the first semester I taught in Mississippi, I taught at East Mississippi Community College, and that was okay. That was fine. The semester after that, I got to teach at both colleges, East Mississippi and Mississippi University for women, because both colleges needed adjunct instructors. So I was able to adjust my schedule so that it fit. Recovering addicts very often become adamant critics of the substances that they used to abuse because of these types of dissonant justifications. Judson Mills in 1958 did research on sixth graders and gave them a chance to cheat. The ones who cheated became more lenient toward cheating. The ones who didn't cheat adopted a harsher attitude toward cheating. And that's what we see with addicts. Once they give up heroin, then they campaign against smoking heroin. They're very much against. Alcoholics do the same thing. According to Weston in 2006, people twirl the cognitive kaleidoscope until the pieces fall into a pattern they want to see. Then the brain repays them by activating circuits involved in pleasure, not unlike what addicts feel when they get a fix. We can find dissonance operating in almost every part of the world, but it does not always take the same form, and the content of cognitions that produce it may differ across cultures. In collectivist societies, where the needs of the group matter more than the needs of the individual, dissonance reducing a behavior might be less prevalent, at least on the surface. In Japan, many people will vicariously experience dissonance on the part of someone they know and like. The observer's attitudes will change to conform to that of their friends. When the behavior is being observed, empathy is reduced, but returns after the observation is over. This is the opposite patterns for Americans. They try to take on the same attitudes as their friends. Americans, not so much. In the United States, immigrant parents and their young adult children often clash over cultural values. The children want to be like their American peers. The parents want them to adhere to their ancestral culture. The dissonance of the children is profound. In a longitudinal study of Vietnamese and Cambodian adolescents in the United States, those suffering the most cognitive dissonance were the most likely to get into trouble, do less well in school, and fight more with their parents. When we put a great deal of effort into a project and then the project does not appear to have been worthwhile, we can justify our efforts through a process called justification of effort. Interpreting the ambiguous as positive, the more effort, the stronger the justifications. And governments do this all the time. Governments will spend lots of money on a project, and when it's a failure, they will try to focus on all the positive things that potentially came out of it, despite the fact that what they said was going to happen didn't happen. Justifications can be internal, changing something about themselves to reduce dissonance, or external. The reason for the dissonance is outside the person and involves an external result, such as a reward or avoiding punishment. Often, in order to be polite in society, we have to develop an opinion or attitude that runs counter to our own beliefs and attitudes. And this is known as counterattitudinal advocacy. When we do this with little external justification, we may begin believing the lie that we are told. Festinger and Carl Smith in 1959 discovered that when you offer someone a large external reward to go against their beliefs, they justify the change with the large reward and don't change their beliefs. But when a small external reward is offered, the individual's beliefs are more likely to change. This is because in order to perform the task with such a small reward, a change of attitude has to take place. This individual can't rationalize their behavior because of a large reward. So you have to change your belief. So if you want to change somebody's belief, make them do something for a small fraction of the money that you might potentially have given them. If you give them a large reward, that's the reason they did it, because of the money. But if it's just a small amount of money, then they will change their beliefs, have to change their belief system in order to do it. The Festinger and Carl Smith experiment has been replicated many times using a myriad of beliefs, but always with the same results. The smaller the incentive, the greater the softening of the attitude. Since there is little external justification, the justification has to be internal. Harsh punishment tends to teach us to try to avoid getting caught. When the child is refraining from doing something he wants to do, and while he does have some justification for not doing it, he lacks complete justification. In this situation, he continues to experience dissonance. Therefore, the individual must find another way to justify their actions. Punishment works in a similar manner to rewards. When the punishment is small, the individual is required to justify their behavior internally, and it is more likely to change the way that they think. The only way to justify your behavior is by self-persuasion. This is known as insufficient punishment. Aronson and Carl Smith, if you notice the name Aronson, that is the name of one of your authors, wanted to follow up on the severe and mild punishment paradigm. They threatened severe and mild punishment for children who played with a select toy. They discovered that some cognitive processes in action with the children and the toys. The children who had received a severe threat continued to rate the forbidden toy as highly desirable or more desirable than they had before the threat. The children in the mild threat condition needed internal justification to reduce their dissonance. They convinced themselves the reason they had not played with the toy was that they did not really like it. They rated the forbidden toy as less attractive than they had when the experiment began. If you want someone to do something or not do something only once, the most effective strategy would be to promise a large reward or threaten severe punishment. But if you want someone to become committed to an attitude or behavior, the smaller the reward or punishment that will lead to momentary compliance, the greater the eventual change will be, and therefore the more permanent. Large rewards and severe punishments as strong external justifications encourage compliance but prevent real attitude change. President Bill Clinton was about to be impeached by Congress for a sexual liaison he had with a White House intern. Righteous indignation swept through the conservative right as Speaker Newt Gingrich readied the gavel to begin proceedings. But before the gavel could come down, it was revealed that Gingrich himself had divorced twice because of an affair, and a long-standing affair was still hot and heavy. Bob Livingston ready to take the speakership and strike the proceedings until it was disclosed that he too was in a long-term affair. Dennis Hastert is the man who gavelled in the impeachment proceedings. Dennis Hastert is currently in prison for 4 counts as a serial child molester from 4 years of molesting members of his high school wrestling team. Hastert was caught because of illegal banking practices, paying hush money to the individuals that he had molested. And this is known as the Hypocrisy Paradigm. So how in the world could they sit in judgment of Bill Clinton when each of them had exactly the same problem? And one of them was even worse. One was a molester. Hypocrisy is where an individual states a position to the point of preaching and then does the opposite in practice. Do as I say and not as I do, but a great deal more extreme. Ted Haggard was a multi-millionaire evangelist who was a darling of the religious right and an advisor to President George W. Bush. He preached against adultery, homosexuality, sex before marriage, and abortion. Therefore, everyone was surprised when he was caught in a drug-fueled 13-year gay relationship that included multiple partners. Whoops. Hypocrisy is a form of the fundamental attribution error. Hypocrites judge others as worse than they are themselves, even though they perform the same or worse than the people they are condemning. Hypocrites are somewhat narcissistic and rationalize their own shortcomings and condemn those of others. Hypocrisy induction is making people aware of their hypocrisy, causing them cognitive dissonance. Research by Takaku in 2006 showed that when people are made aware of their hypocritical dissonance, they go quickly from anger to forgiveness. Dissonance theory predicts that when we dislike someone, if we do them a favor, we will like them more. Ben Franklin was able to make an enemy a friend by doing him a favor. After the favor, both Franklin and his former enemy liked each other. This is known as the Ben Franklin effect. During World War I, we were fighting against the Germans, and we called them the Huns and the Krauts. And of course, during the Second World War, we tried to dehumanize the enemy, and we talked a lot about Japs, the Japanese. And these are some of the propaganda posters from the Second World War. Look at his fingernails. They look like claws. And he's about to kill this woman. And here's one. He's stripped naked and he's carrying... Uh-oh. There's the Germans. They eat babies. Soldiers eat babies. That's a fact. Don't kid yourself. It's up to you to stop him. Look how crazed Hitler looks. Fighting an enemy is still fighting another human with all the attributes of any other human. Often this can only be done if the enemy is dehumanized. It happens in every war and often is propaganda before combat begins. Such prejudice makes ruthlessness and cruelty easier. Cruel behavior is dissonant with our view of self as a decent human being. If we harm someone, this creates dissonance between what we did, inflict pain on another person, and our view of ourselves as a decent person. To resolve the dissonance, we may come to hate our victim and engage in dehumanization. By convincing ourselves that our victim is less than human, we reduce the dissonance. All too often, prejudice is rationalized in much the same way, by dehumanizing the target population. This has been the fate of just about any minority in the United States at one point or another. Dehumanization of outgroups, minorities, or enemies is an unfortunately common way of reducing dissonance. On 14 May 2022, fascist and white supremacist Peyton Gendron traveled over 200 miles to attack a black neighborhood grocery in Buffalo, New York. He was able to kill 10 people and wound 3. His motivation was hate for black people who he was afraid were going to replace the white race in the United States, the Great Replacement Theory. In an act of ultimate cognitive dissonance, Gendron's best friend is Hispanic Matthew Casado, who has a black girlfriend. The 3 friends would hang out together frequently. Gendron stored extra ammunition and a high-powered rifle at Casado's house before he made his trip to Buffalo. The ultimate cognitive dissonance. And that is the end of the chapter. So I'll talk to you guys next week.